Some of the views expressed on the Mormon Channel are solely for the education and inspiration of our audience and may not represent the official position of the Church.
We believe in God, the Eternal Father.
We believe in the Bible to be the Word of God.
We believe in being honest, true, chaste, benevolent, virtuous.
We believe that through the atonement of Christ, all mankind
We also
is saved
believe the
by
Book of Mormon to be the Word
Lord.
of God.
We may say that we follow the admonition of Paul. We believe all things. We hope all things. We have endured many things.
Welcome to Why I Believe. My name is Rick Starr. Kieth Merrill is a storyteller. As a writer, director, and filmmaker, Kieth has a long list of film credits and awards, including an Oscar for The Great American Cowboy. He is also a pioneer in the commercial large-screen cinema format called IMAX, and introduced the concept of destination cinema. Many of his films are available at IMAX theaters at the Grand Canyon, Zions National Park, and Yellowstone. As a storyteller, Kieth is also an author, and has just released his debut novel, The Evolution of Thomas Hall. You may know Kieth as the producer and director of the well-known church-produced films, Legacy and The Testaments. Perhaps the accomplishments that Kieth Merrill could count among his greatest are that of husband, father of 8 children, and member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Kieth, welcome to Why I Believe. It's great to have you here with us
Thank
today.
you. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Well, Kieth, you were raised in what you term as a small Mormon town, Farmington, Utah.
Farmington, Utah. Yeah, yeah. And when I was there, you couldn't get much smaller or more Mormon than Farmington, Utah.
Everybody knew everybody.
Pretty much.
Farmington.
Yeah.
Your parents, you grew up in a very, I guess you call it artsy home. Your father was an artist. Your mother was a screenplay writer. Or a playwright?
She was an actress. My mom was actually an actress. My dad was an artist.
Mm-hmm.
He had a master's in art. He taught art for a while, and then the realities of life forced him into sales, and he created a company of his own that sustained the family until he retired. And then he went back and painted 500 paintings between the time he retired and the time he passed away.
Wow, really?
Yeah, and some of them are hung we're proud to say, are hung in the church museum. And one of them was actually referenced by Elder Bednar in one of the talks, which is now available as a reproduction from Deseret Book. It was the one that's hanging in the museum. So yeah,
well, that is wonderful.
Yeah, so Dad's influence was huge, much more so than I realized until later when you look back and realize. But you grow up and your parents are your parents, and you figure everybody's dad can paint and everybody's mom's an actress, right?
Yes, yeah. But you were in Farmington, which was a small community, to a great degree a farming community, isn't that correct?
Exactly, yeah.
Was that the type of childhood you had? Were you on a farm? Or?
Well, we not literally in the classic sense, though. Until I was 7 years old, we lived on a couple acres with a cow and some chickens and a garden and a pump that we had to haul water from. Believe it or not, it would freeze up in the winter. We had running water in the house, but I'm saying when the pipes froze, we had to go we had an old hand crank pump out in the woods. So to that extent, it was pretty rural. It dates me, I suppose. But then as a kid, I went to work when I was 12 years old on a dairy farm. Mm-hmm. So I really was a farm kid, no question about it. Horses and tractors and all that stuff.
Yeah.
So yeah,
good work ethic.
Oh, it was wonderful, and the work ethic I learned from Hap Robinson, which was a tough, crusty old farmer, scared me to death. But yeah, I worked for him 25 cents an hour, and everything from hoeing corn to milking cows to hauling manure, and it was a great way to grow up. I lament, in fact. So I see my grandkids, growing up in a digital generation with nothing but sports and computers and homework to fill up their days and their weekends that worries me a bit. I mean, I don't know. Maybe I'm old-fashioned, but there's something about hard work for no money that shapes you.
Yeah. Well, I think that shows in a lot of your work. We'll talk about that in a little bit.
Okay.
A lot of your work does feature the outdoors, and I'm anxious to hear about your love of the outdoors. When you were a child, Kieth, did you see yourself becoming a writer or a storyteller in any way?
No, I really didn't. It's funny. The influences in your life are not apparent when they're taking place. It's only with reflection, sometimes many years later, that you recognize the influence. Like my dad being an artist, like my mom being an actress. It never occurred to me until after I've been making films for 10 years that might have had some big influence on me. But no, I did not aspire to any of those things, but I was tremendously influenced by movies as a kid. Mm-hmm. We had a ward show in our old rock chapel. Some inspired bishop had put in twin projectors because there was no movie theater in our little town. Mm-hmm. And so every Thursday night we would have the ward show, 7 o'clock, 9 o'clock. You get to go if you paid your ward budget. The Boy Scouts would sell you popcorn and candy. And so I grew up on Frank Capra and Roy Rogers and Gene Autry and all those wonderful, films from the early years. So all those things had an influence, but it wasn't really until after my mission that I began to accept the reality that I was that all things creative were of great interest to me, and all things that were technical and organized and left-brained were of very little interest to me. In our lives today reflect it perfectly. My office at home is a disaster. I can never keep my desk clean. I can never keep junk off the floor. I can never file things away. And my wife's office is absolutely immaculate. The desk is always clean. Everything's in orderly piles. All of her files are perfect.
Sounds like you married the right woman.
We have a perfect marriage. We have an absolutely perfect marriage. We have the perfect yin and yang, the perfect balance.
That's great. Well, you went to BYU, right?
I did.
Did you study film there?
They did not have a film program at BYU when I attended. In fact, I was interested in going to film school. There were only, as I recall, 5 universities in the United States that offered advanced film degrees when I graduated from BYU. And they did not have a film program at BYU. However, I had actually dropped out between my junior and senior year right after I got married, and I stayed out of school for a couple of years, and that was when I fell in love with making movies and started making movies and bought a 16-millimeter camera and started doing film experimentally. So when I went back to finish my degree in communications, I brought with me a whole bag of tricks, a 16-millimeter Bolex and lenses and some experience, and sort of pleaded with them to allow me to somehow incorporate that into the final year and a half of my degree. And a very enlightened instructor by the name of Heber Woolsey, who became a great friend and mentor, allowed me to do that. So while I graduated technically in the Department of Communications with a degree in television and public relations, in fact, all of my projects were done on film. So I had kind of a private little film school at BYU.
You're just kind of doing your own little passion on the side.
My own little things. I did all. Everybody else was doing, down at the broadcast, shooting on video, and I was out in the woods shooting on film. So.
I read a story about you and your wife. There was a time when you had considered a different field. Weren't you planning at one point going into a medical field?
Well,
possibly?
I was. Yeah, I was. I totally lied to my wife. I persuaded her to marry me because I was going to be a wealthy doctor, and but it was sincere at the time. It's curious too because when in Farmington, Utah, the most prestigious citizen and certainly the wealthiest was the doctor who lived at the end of the street on a big house on a hill. And growing up, he was a mystical figure for us, the doctor, the rich doctor on the hill. And so as a kid, I thought, well, and my dad, who struggled as an artist and ultimately had to abandon his art to make a living, in the shadows of the Depression, discouraged me from artistic things and sort of drilled into my brain, be a doctor, be a doctor, be a doctor. So yeah, I grew up thinking, okay, I'll be a doctor. But what was curious, and again, it's always in retrospect that you recognize these things, but I found myself gravitating towards being a medical illustrator, because someone explained that to be a medical illustrator, you had to have a doctor's degree, but then these wonderful books. This is pre-internet, obviously, pre-computers, when everything was done. The human body and the hearts and the lungs and everything were in these big illustrated medical manuals. And I thought, well, that's what I'll do. I'll go to medical school, and become an illustrator, not recognizing that what I was saying to myself is, "You're an artist. You're an artist. You're an artist." And then. I went to California after we were married to establish residency and finish college in California. I had 1 semester left, or a year and a half left. So we moved to California to establish residency so that I could finish college there and then apply for medical school at the University of California, San Francisco. That was the plan. And there was a year that I was not in school. I was establishing the residency. That's when I started to make movies, and I started to poke at it and play at it and do little animated movies, and then one day I said to my wife, I think I want to make movies.
How did she respond?
I'd made a couple of short films for the people that I worked for at the time. I worked for a real estate developer that had a big land development. I persuaded him to allow me to do a film about that project, and then I had an opportunity to go off to Australia with one of his partners and do another film, and that's when I became passionate about making movies. And when I came home. In fact, before I came home, I called my wife from Australia, and I said, one of the promises I made when we got married is that I would take you on a trip around the world. That was one of her great dreams. One of the things her dad had promised her, well, we're going to go around the world, and they never did. So when we got married, I said, okay, I promise I'll take you around the world. When I finished my little film in Australia, I realized that my ticket was, it was just as cheap for me to fly home the long ways, come
around
back across the Pacific. So I called her. I said, "Do you remember that $2,500 life insurance policy that my grandfather gave us for our wedding?" I said, "Cash it in. Take the money, dump the kids with my brother, meet me in Australia, and I'll take you around the world. Because when I come home, I'm not going back to work. I'm going to be a filmmaker." And she said, okay. So she sold the insurance and met me in Australia. We traveled for 6 weeks around the world, shot film, had the time of our life, lived on $20 a day.
Oh, wow.
Ate food.
What a memory.
It was amazing that we survived. And when I returned, I finished the film as I'd agreed, and then hung out a shingle and said, filmmaker. But, the key to life is who you marry. And I married an unbelievable woman, because to have literally lived every day of our lives together with the expectation that we were going to go on into a medical career, and then to have a sudden left turn into filmmaking. And when I told her, I've never forgotten it. I was actually driving up Highway 280 from Palo Alto back to the Bay Area where we lived, and I said, I have something I need to tell you. And she said, what? And I said, I really think that I don't want to go to medical school. I really think I want to make films. And I've never forgotten what she said, because she's such an amazing woman that she said, well, all right, if that's what you want, then let's get up tomorrow morning and not let one day pass without moving towards that goal. I don't mean to get emotional. I'm sorry. I haven't told this story
That's amazing.
for a long, long time, but that's the woman I married, 46 years ago. And without that, it would be extremely difficult. And someone else very near and dear to me, who's a filmmaker, didn't marry a woman that has that kind of loyalty and support, and as a consequence, their marriage is gone, and it's all because it takes an incredible woman to stick by somebody who has a dream, who wants to do something crazy like make movies, which is an impossible field to be in, and abide by the standards of the church, raise a family, do all the things. It just takes an unbelievable woman, And so, what did you ask me to get me off on that story? What a
that was the point. I mean, that is just great to hear that you've had such wonderful.
Well,
support.
that was this
has been a team effort. It sounds like.
Impossible without her. I mean, from that first moment, had she panicked, had she balked, had she said, "No way, that's not what we've talked about," but she didn't even think about it. She just, That's amazing.
Let's start down that road and behind.
So she said, if that's what we're going to do, then tomorrow morning we'll get up and not let one day pass, but what we move towards that goal. That was what she said, and so we did. And then about a year later, not even a year later, we decided to. I had acquired some film equipment, and we went back to BYU to finish up, and the rest
that was the
is
beginning
history.
of it.
Yeah.
Keith, when you started film, this was the late 60s, early 70s,
Right.
which during that time, that was a time when that art, filmmaking, was to a great degree separating itself from values and morals and that kind of thing. How did you jump into this industry?
Well, it was kind of at the beginning. The late '60s was really, of course, it changed the world. What was going on? We lived in Berkeley. I mean, of all places, we lived in Berkeley, California. So we were right in the middle of what was going on in Berkeley. We got married in 1964 and moved to Berkeley, California, and of course that was the Vietnam. That was the sexual revolution. That was all of the things that have really changed the culture of America in major ways. And certainly part of it was the sort of blatant. What's the right way to say it? It was kind of the blatant overthrowing of sort of social mores and values in film. And so I've basically repeated your question. But what caused us to dive in? Honestly, I wish there was a really profound philosophical response, but it really wasn't. It was finally coming to grips with who I was. And that happened really with a film I saw by a filmmaker named Saul Bass, who was a brilliant designer, kind of an advertising guy, but he made a film called Why Man Creates. And every creative person on the planet needs to see that movie. Every person who feels creative urges and desires and aspirations needs to see that film, because that film changed my life completely in that it allowed me to come face to face with who I really was. And so the plunge into film was not global, and it wasn't philosophical, and it wasn't religious. It was just it was
part
just,
of you.
I've discovered who I am.
Yeah.
And I'm not a left brain person. I'm a right brain person. That nomenclature came in much later, but it's an easy way to describe it so everybody understands it. Is that all of everything I did, no matter what it was, it gravitated towards some kind of a creative outlet, some kind of a creative expression, and so that's really what it was about. It was you're young and you're dumb and you don't really understand the world, and you're not caught up in all the movements and the gravitas of the world. We were just a couple of young married kids saying, what are we going to do? And let's make movies. And so that's kind of how it started. And then of course what happens is as you begin to have opportunity, and Great American Cowboy and the Academy Award, of course, kicked all the doors open. Suddenly people were seeing my films, and suddenly I was making films that were getting released in theaters and so on. And then you start to feel a real sense of responsibility in terms of who you are and what you're doing and what you're saying.
Yeah.
And
I want to talk about the Great American Cowboy, but before we talk about that, you've discovered you're a creative person, but here you are a member of the church who's been raised with certain morals, values, and standards, and you had to have been put in a position many times when you had to stand your moral ground. Is that the case?
Yeah. Well, that question comes up a lot. How have you survived this industry, and how challenging has it been? And and I'm often asked, well, have you lost opportunities, because you're a Mormon and your standards, and probably a lot of them, but I don't know about most of them because it happened in a back room where my name came up in the early days when I was sort of a hot property in Hollywood. By that I mean you win an Academy Award, and for a few years you're a hot property. You got agencies after you, got people calling you about projects and so on. And so there's probably no question that in those days, behind closed doors in meetings where I wasn't present, somebody said, the guy's a Mormon, and blah blah blah, and he's not right for this project. But it is interesting because there were several friends that kind of were contemporaries and started in the business about the same time and didn't survive it. As far as the church is concerned, and their marriages and their families and things, they didn't survive. I mean, they're still good guys and they're creative people, but Hollywood consumed them. We have a list of famous actors that are supposedly Mormon that didn't survive it. And whether any of them went there as active members or not is a questionable thing, but. I think you stand your ground in the quiet solitude of your closet. You don't stand your ground in the public square because you've already made your choice, and so you may not ultimately find yourself where you have to fall on your sword and die,
right? Because
you identify who you are, you establish who you are. And that goes before you and clears the way. And I've only had one real specific experience where being a Mormon directly kept me from a project, and it was an IMAX film for a gentleman in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, who was a minister who runs an organization called, and he and I are still friends, Bill Curtis. We became friends over our conflicts. But he wanted me to come in and do an IMAX theater and film on the creation. He's a creationist. He's a 6-day creationist, and he has an institution called Bible and Scientific Studies or something. Smart guy, PhD. Nice man, nice wife, good Christian. And so I fly to Lancaster, and we brainstorm, and we talk about how we make a film about the creation, and that's his vision, is to have like a Christian amusement park with this giant screen theater, and you come and you show the creation of the world and all these things. And of course, I'm thinking, well, this will be the definitive temple film.
Did he know you were LDS?
And he did know I
Okay.
was. He discovered I was LDS in the process of our acquaintance, because as I said, I've made all my decisions in the quiet solitude of my room. I don't rethink things and try to decide when the crisis comes up. And as a result, I always make sure that people know that I'm LDS early in the conversation, because it saves a lot of awkward moments later on it's just the way I've approached it. So early in the conversations, I make sure Bill knows that I'm a good LDS guy, and it doesn't seem to impact him at that point. We talk and we brainstorm and we have correspondence back and forth, and the project moves forward and gets to the point where we're ready to sign a contract. And then I get one of the most interesting letters of my life. My fee for the film was $500,000. It was about what I was getting in those days for a major project like that. And so that's what's at stake. I get an interesting letter from Bill that says that he's met with his board, and because of my membership in the church, in order to sign the contract, I will need to formally denounce my belief in the Mormon Church.
Really?
Yeah. And now as kids, we always fantasize, well, yeah, but Ronnie, what if somebody put a gun to your head and said, deny Jesus, what would you do?
Yeah, like those old pioneer stories
kids,
you hear.
That's right. I mean, we play that game, but, what would it take for us to deny it and say, yeah, but I'd cross my fingers and then it would be okay. I mean, as kids, we used to go through that. Well, I wasn't a kid, and here I am with a $500,000 gun to my head, saying goodness. All you need to do is just reassure our board that you disavowed the LDS Church, because we cannot abide a Mormon making the films for our group, because we think that you guys don't believe in Jesus. Well, I mean, it took about a nanosecond to decide what to do. There was no. Yeah. There was no decision. There was no debate. There was no discussion. For us, it was humorous. And I, in fact, wrote some interesting articles about that, But that was the only time there was kind of a real blatant request to disavow myself. And I think that was the word that he used. And I wrote him back. And as I say, we still correspond. And he still calls me to repentance and tells me that I'm worshiping Satan and believing in Joseph Smith, and I keep sending him articles and just saying, yeah, but Bill, what if you're wrong?
Yeah.
So now we've kind of agreed. Look, we both believe that there's a hereafter, and we're going to have another interesting conversation.
Yeah.
So
you agree to disagree until then.
Yeah.
Then you'll meet up again.
And it's been a curious correspondence over the years, but otherwise, not really. When I had an agent in Hollywood, I tried the agent thing after Great American Cowboy. There was, people wanted to sign me, and so I went with an agency, and I wrote a paragraph that I required in all of my contracts, and the paragraph basically said that I couldn't do a film or any contract. It had to be in any contract, and it basically said that no changes to the film can be done editorially after my involvement without my approval that in any way changes the moral tone or values. No additional footage can be shot, because the Hollywood's notorious for that. You do a movie
changes.
And then you go, and then they in those days they'd shoot one sex scene, or they'd do this or they'd do that or whatever. And so I just said, and the agent said, nobody in this town will sign a contract with that. They just won't do it. And I said, well, then I guess we won't be signing any contracts. I said that, and the agent didn't get it. He absolutely didn't get it. He just said, what does it matter? I said, it matters. And I said, because, I don't want to ever make a movie that my grandkids can't see. It's that simple. And
wonderful point.
We had a stormy relationship, that agent and I, for about a year. He sent me a script. It was a turning point. Turning points are funny in your life. I explained to him who I was. I explained to him about my family, about my children. The reason I didn't live in Hollywood, I lived in Northern California because I didn't want to raise my children in that environment, and so on and so on. I didn't want to be part of the culture. I just wanted to make movies. And so he tried to understand, but he never did. And then he sent me a script, and all excited. Letter on these guys. They love your work. They're ready to go. And this is a big breakthrough. I mean, you've done a feature documentary. It's gotten a lot of attention. It gotten an Academy Award. Now I'm a hot property. So it's a matter of taking the next step and building the career. And so so here comes the script. Ready to go. They love your stuff. Ready, just give this a quick read, and I'm sure you're going to love it. It was called "They Came Without Eyes" was the name of the script. By page 4, every heinous sin that I had ever been familiar with had been committed either upon or by one of the characters. And I thought it was so blatant that I thought it was a joke. So I called him and I said, Larry, that's very funny. And he said, what's funny? And I said, the script. And he said, you like it? You like the script? And I said,
oh, my goodness.
I said, it's a joke, right? And he said, no, they love it. They love your stuff. He said, you want to do it? You want to go? And I said, have you read it? No, but they say it's a coming-of-age story. And I said, this is the trashiest. I said, I read to page 4 and stopped. I said, every heinous thing that there's murder, there's sex, by page 4, I said, Larry, did you not hear anything I said?
My goodness.
That was, and so he
still didn't get it.
And it was funny. So anyway, our my contract ended in a year, and I never went, and I never signed agents again. I never did it with agents.
You made a great point, though, Keith. To those who are maybe listening to this program, who are anxious to make their mark in an art career or a film career, even maybe a finance career. You said something in a BYU interview a few years ago, and I think you hinted at this a few minutes ago. And what you said was, I think you just make a decision and you only make it once so that every time you're confronted with a choice, you don't have to rethink all of the ramifications. You think, well, I've made that decision and that's it. So,
yep.
and that's the standard you've taken. It sounds like with your.
Well, it's easier. When I speak to teenagers, I tell them, I say, look, it's not difficult. There's only about 6 things you have to really watch out for, and just make the decisions now. Don't make the decision about sexual purity in the backseat of the 40 Ford every Friday night. Just make it while you're sitting in church on Sunday. And then it doesn't come up again. But if you have to keep rethinking those decisions every time there's a temptation, sooner or later Satan's going to win. And so that's just a reflection of it in helping young people. But it's honestly the way I've tried to go about it is you just kind of draw the line in the sand and just says, that's kind of it.
Yeah.
Life is tough enough. It's always gray, even when you draw hard lines. It's still,
Yeah. That is so true. Well, it's a good point to make, especially with young people as they're looking to their future and what they're going to do for their living. You're listening to Why I Believe. Our guest today is Keith Merrill, filmmaker, storyteller, and also author who recently released a book called The Evolution of Thomas Hall. It's great to have you with us,
Thank you.
Keith. Some great stories in your career. You won an Oscar award in 1973 for an All-American Cowboy.
Right.
And there's an interesting story because as you were talking about, that opened a lot of doors, and you were a hot ticket. You were the director, to go to. You were a go-to person at that point.
Yeah, for about a year. I thought I was hot.
There's an interesting story about you having that statue and your daughter's conversation with you. Will you share that with our listeners?
Well, as I say, I thought I was hot, because you get caught up. The sizzle of the Academy Awards and winning the Oscar, and I had no expectations. David Wolper was up for that film about the soccer team that went down in the Andes Mountains, and that was the shoe-in winner. And then we won, and so I didn't get my hand off the Oscar for like 3 days. I didn't realize you're supposed to leave it behind so they could engrave it. I'm walking around with it, and I fly home to our little Northern California community, and of course, without expectation, the local press is there, and all the friends are there, and people I knew from high school suddenly materialize and want to be my friend. And so for like 3 or 4 days, we just had this big celebration. I mean, it was, and I am getting caught up in it. I mean, I'm only human, and I'm thinking, I am pretty cool, and I'm very focused on myself. Everybody, there's just all this adulation, all this congratulations, all the photographs, all the interviews. I mean, it's very intoxicating. And about day 3, I get a tug on my pants. And I look down, it's my 8-year-old daughter, Kayla. And she says, Dad, that little gold doll you brought home is really important, isn't it? And I said, it really is. It is really important. And she said, do you love it? And I said, well, I think I do. I think I do. I think I love it. Well, do you love it more than you love me? And it hit me like a bolt. All of a sudden, I realized that for 3 days, I had allowed myself to get totally caught up in myself, forgetting who I was, forgetting my responsibility, forgetting who I was in her eyes. And I was a dad, and I wasn't anybody special. And the glitter of Hollywood was just a passing moment. And she was what was important in my life. And I dropped down, I put my arms around her, and I said, Kayla, there's nothing in this world I love more than I love you. Mm-hmm. And she said, oh, that's good, Dad. Can I take it to show and tell? and I said, I made a decision right then. I said, absolutely, you can take it to show and tell. And so the Oscar in our house was not a revered symbol of anything. Mm-hmm. It was carted about in doll buggies and played with and passed around and not sacrosanct at all. It just became something that the kids could access and play with and show off and do whatever they wanted to do. And then we heard of a little boy over in the Stanford Children's Hospital who loved movies, and his grand dream, someone said, was to see an Oscar. And so we took it over and let him hold it and took pictures with him, and he had terminal cancer. And he dropped it, and it broke. And so symbolically, that was interesting to me as well. And so we just laid it up on the shelf, and this was there for years, broken off the base. Oh. And one day my wife says, that is so ugly. Either you ought to take it down and get rid of it, or you ought to get it fixed. And so I confess I hadn't completely given up my arrogance, so I got it fixed and put it out in my office. But it also it was also in our bathroom for a long time. We thought that was an appropriate place for it. In fact, in our home, in one of our homes, I had a studio downstairs where we did all of our editing, and the editors would come and go, and we had a room where they'd actually stay. It's where T.C. Christensen kind of cut his chops in learning how to edit. And in that bathroom, in the guest bathroom downstairs for the editors, that's where I put all my film awards, because I thought, I said, it's to keep it in perspective. So we just hung them all in the bathroom.
Give it a rightful place.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Well, you are, Keith, you are a family man. You have 8 children. 8 children. But you are in an industry that we know involves a lot of travel, and especially the type of films that you produced. A lot of them of grand panoramas, places that all of us would love to go to. Yeah. How did you involve your family in your career?
we just made decisions that family was going to be a part of it. It wasn't always possible, but wherever possible, we always took the family with us. Or when it wasn't possible to take the whole family, I would try then to take turns and take one of the kids. We had the good fortune of being able to put our children in private school. And that allowed us some flexibility. We kind of made a deal with the school, is that we pull them out for a month while we're traveling, or a year while we're doing this or that. We did a film after the Great American Cowboy. I did a film called Indian, Native Americans. We traveled for 5 months, over 35,000 miles, and took the family with us the whole time.
Did you
just packed up in
a motorhome?
Big motorhome, and a caravan of motorhomes was our crew, and we just we took another family with us that had kids our age, and people say, well, you spend a lot of time in the IMAX world, and that was the time of our family, and it was a perfect time because we could take the family to Yellowstone and to Grand Canyon and to all these great places, not necessarily for the whole time, but coming and going. And
you really found a perfect niche
as
a filmmaker.
It was ideal, and also from a value standpoint, it was just kind of never an issue. It was because they're uplifting films, and that's why we stayed with that for a while. And then as the kids moved on and IMAX moved on, we've gone back to more traditional kinds of films. Yeah.
I've noticed as I've looked at your list of films that you've made or been involved in, and there's quite a few, actually.
Yeah, there's a bunch, yeah.
And you had mentioned in another program, in Everything Creative on the Mormon Channel, that there's quite a few that you would still love to produce that may never get produced.
Yeah.
But the recurring themes that I notice are you seem to have a great love for the outdoors, particularly maybe Western themes, that kind of thing, and values. So but we'll come back to values, but talk a little bit about your love for the outdoors.
Well, if I'd had my way, I'd be wearing my boots today. But my wife said that, no, you've got to change your image. That's your film image. That's not your author image. So she made me wear real shoes today. No, I'm a cowboy at heart. I mean, I grew up in Farmington, Utah, and in the 50s. And Saturday for us was take some horses up in the hills and chase each other around and play cowboy. I mean, literally, we'd ride horses up on the fire trails, and one of our favorite games was two guys would ride ahead and three guys would wait behind, and the two guys would hide, and then they'd bushwhack us, literally. I mean, they would hide in the rocks on the cliffs and would ride under, and then they'd jump onto us or whatever. I mean, it was because we were reliving those wonderful Paramount Westerns that we grew up on. That's kind of who I was. I never really owned horses myself, but everybody in town had horses and access to horses, and so we were always riding horses and having having kind of a cowboy experience. And then, of course, the Great American Cowboy took me back to those roots, and I lived in that world for a year. I don't know for sure why, but I have a deep affection for Native Americans. We had a great opportunity to do a film. I traveled, as I said, 35,000 miles, visited almost every Indian reservation in the United States, and got deeply into that history. Did Windwalker, which was a film about Native Americans, and loved that exploration, that experience. In all the IMAX films, I try to develop the kind of the historical roots of a place, and in almost every instance, of course, it has to do with the West. It has to do with Native Americans. I mean, you can't talk about the Grand Canyon or Zion National Park or Yellowstone or Branson, Missouri, without talking about the West and the development of the West. So, I'm just. And you know what the great films are that's still out there that I finished screenplays ready to go? Last of the Cowboys. I mean, it's an incredible film. I just had to find a way to get it made.
This is a film that you've written.
It's a screenplay I've written. It's terrific. I just need $25 million to make it. Legend of Wind River, inspired by the story of Sacagawea. Sakakawea is the way the Hidatsa say it. I love the West, and I love the open spaces. I'm a conservationist. I'm not an environmentalist by any means. I'm a conservationist and believe in preservation of special places. I think the national parks are one of the great things that ever happened in this country. Even though I hate government intervention in anything, one of the really smart things the government did was to block out these great tracts of special land to preserve them for generations. I love the open spaces, and I still got some great Westerns to make, so I just figure out how to do it.
Well, I hope there's opportunity, because I know I'd love to see them.
Yeah, they exist in my mind, and they may have to end up in books. That's again part of the reason I'm writing books, is because I've got these wonderful stories that I think are wonderful. They're wonderful to me, and wonderful characters that have values, And you can't, there's an old saying, you can't take the art out of the artist, and you can't take the artist out of the art. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people say, well, but, your films are modeling, or they're too value-oriented, in certain circles. But say, that's who I am. I mean, mm-hmm. I don't infuse values. I don't sit down and say, okay, here's the movie. How can I put a value in? I can't write it. I can't write a story or create a character that doesn't have some value. Thomas Hall is an arrogant, egotistical, agnostic artist.
This is the character in your book.
This is the character in the book, The Evolution of Thomas Hall. But what's the story about? The story is about him coming to grips with the cowardice of agnosticism, the fear of committing to either God or no God. Mm-hmm. It's to float in that no man's land where, well, maybe he is and maybe he isn't.
Yeah.
And it's a fun place to start a character, and then let him evolve to a profound belief in God because of his own experiences, because of his own humility, because of being brought to his knees by his inability to do what he normally can do, because he's confronted with the face of Christ. How do I paint the face of a man that I don't know?
Mm-hmm. And he had to come to know him.
And he comes to know him. Yeah,
that's wonderful.
You're going to like this book.
I just picked up a copy this morning and haven't had a chance to read it yet, but I'm looking forward to it. Our guest today is Kieth Merrill, who is a storyteller at heart, also a filmmaker and author as a result of being a storyteller. Kieth, let's talk about values in filmmaking. You mentioned earlier that this is who you are. And in the film that won an Oscar, A Great American Cowboy, back in 1973, you were criticized at that point for making a documentary that showed cowboys, but showed them praying and the good in them and that kind of thing. And maybe people wanted to see, the dirty side of cowboys and that kind of thing. But you preferred to choose the higher road, I guess you could say. Talk a little bit about that in your filmmaking.
Well, look, as Latter-day Saints, one of our favorite scriptures, and certainly most oft-quoted, is their opposition in all things. Mm-hmm. The whole pattern of the plan of salvation is good and evil. It's not more complicated than that. Mm-hmm. Every one of us has good and evil in us. Some of us struggle hard to have more good than evil, and hopefully it just goes from evil to bad or weakness. But in every culture, whether in every culture, in every institution, whether it be politics or business or the rodeo circuit, you're going to have opposition. You're going to have good and you're going to have bad. So the choice a filmmaker must make is, what's my point of view? What's the perspective? Mm-hmm. We have no obligation to be balanced, fair and balanced. That isn't the responsibility of a documentary filmmaker. Some may argue and say, "Oh, absolutely, you've got to show the bad if you show the good." I disagree completely. Mm-hmm. I think that the privilege and the right of a filmmaker is to pick a point of view and focus on those things that are important. And when I was asked that in an interview on ABC, I think, or one of the major stations after the film, they brought that up. They said, "Look, cowboys are known, for being rowdy and womanizers and drinking, hard drinking, and all this stuff, fighting, and we don't see any of that in the movie." And I said, "Look, how long is the movie?" And they said, "I don't know. How long is it?" I said, "It's 89 minutes." I said, "I've got 89 minutes to display one of the great cultural pockets of Western civilization, in my view." Mm-hmm. And I said, "I just choose to show all the positive." And as it was, there was a lot of positive I couldn't put in. But the Little Britches rodeos, praying before every rodeo, the heroism and the courage of these guys who really feel that their roots go back into native soil, Mm-hmm. I said, that's the story I want to tell. It isn't the other story. You can turn on the TV any night and see that stuff.
Yeah.
And so that's it's the prerogative of the filmmaker to pick the point of view, and you can't take the art out of the artist. You can't take the values out of a person who believes in God and believes in Christ and believes in the restoration of the gospel, you just can't. But I will make one interesting point, and this is a comment for artists, for filmmakers and artists in the LDS community. I understand the struggle to stay within the walls, because the creative impulse, the creative nature is to cross the line, to look at the dark underbelly, to turn it over, to look at it from the other side, to rip it open, to exploit it, to expose it, etc. I mean, and so we see that constantly in the art. It's like, it's the integrity of the artist. It's to throw off convention. It's to rip it open. It's to expose it and show
things
it
as they really are.
Exactly, as they really are. And that's part of the creative nature. It's part of the artistic nature. March to your own drum. And so people say, I'm only marching to my own drum, and therefore they do art of intros, or whatever. Just crazy stuff that they feel somehow expresses that inner need to turn convention upside down. Artists struggle with that, and in the framework of the gospel, it's a constant struggle. But like making a decision once, you simply say, who am I, and what am I to be about, and how presumptuous it is for me to be smarter than God and to be more creative than God and to somehow empower myself by my own ego that I have the right or the responsibility to look at the dark underbelly of life when there's so much beauty. And God's manifest in the beauty He's created. He said it Himself. He says, if you look around, you want to know me? Look around. Why would we spend time with the dark and the dismal and the discouraging and the depressing when there's so much beauty and there's so much manifestation of God in the good things? And so for me as a filmmaker, and my appeal to all Mormon artists would be, look, leave that to the other folks. Let's work hard to go the other direction to manifest the beauty. Yeah,
that's a great point. That's a great point. You also mentioned you've made a number of films for the church. And,
well, not so many. 4.
4, okay.
4.
Let's see. I'm thinking Testaments, Legacy.
Testaments, Legacy,
Mr. Kruger's Christmas,
and a little direct gospel message film called On the Way Home.
On the Way Home, and I remember that. Yes, because I was involved in the sound on that.
And a couple of the home friends over the years, but I don't count those as film.
Oh yeah. Well, you once mentioned. And this appears to be your statement about the culmination of your career. What it all is all about. And here's what you said: when I was on the set of the Testaments, filming the scene of the Savior in the temple, where He announces who He is and says, "This day is this scripture fulfilled in your ears." Truman Madsen was standing by me to make sure that I had him reading right to left and doing it all appropriate. Suddenly, at that moment, I realized I wouldn't trade anything to be anywhere else than be in that spot, in that moment, on that day. I loved that moment. Talk a little bit about that.
Well, there's a lot behind that I don't know if I should talk about, but I mentioned, whether we talked about it, the Grand Canyon project has made $500 million. I was forced out of that project by unscrupulous partners, even though I was supposed to end up with a significant profit participation after recovery of the investment. The terms of the investment were so tough, they never imagined that my partner and I would ever kick in to our share, because they got a 20% internal rate of return from first dollar, and they did the calculation.
So they didn't think it would make money.
It's impossible. Well, they thought it would make money, but they never thought it would make that kind of return, because it's a compounded return, and they said there's no way. 20% internal rate of return from first dollar is almost impossible to achieve in most investment. So they weren't even worried about it. Well, 7 years out, it hit that moment, and they looked at the contract and they found a loophole that they could sell the company to themselves effectively, and thereby take us out at a zero capital account. And so that's what they proposed to do, and I just come off of a big lawsuit over Windwalker, and I had no stomach, and make a long story short, we settled for 5 cents on the dollar, my partner and I, and walked away. And they went on to make hundreds of millions of dollars. The sad thing is that the man who choreographed that was a good member of the church, who had leadership positions in the church. And when I confronted him, he said to me, "Keith, you have to separate the church and business. You've got to keep them separate." I've never forgotten that statement. And that burned in my soul for years and years and years. Not that I had lost $25 million, which was troublesome enough, but the fact that I'd been so taken advantage of by a good member of the church, who had the gall to tell me that he understood that he had taken advantage of me, but separate church and state was a, and it cankered my soul till that moment, which is why this story is important. Till that moment, it cankered my soul, because in that moment, I realized that had my life taken any other course, had I not been expelled, had I been making $1 million or $2 million a year for the last 15 years, I wouldn't be standing in that spot.
On the Testaments.
You can't look back and say, I want it both ways. It doesn't mean I would have been in a bad place, but I wouldn't have been there, because I know what brought me to that spot. And any other course, particularly a very affluent life, would not have brought me to that spot. And that's why I said that. And that's why that was such an incredibly cleansing moment, because all that, it was never hate, but all the offense, all the hurt, all the regret, all the anger washed away, as it were, in the tears of the Savior, because I would not have traded that moment for $25 million then nor today. And it was a great lesson to learn, because I now developed the philosophy that if this is a good moment, we should never look back and regret. Because if this is, and I love this moment, I love being here with you, I love being on the Mormon channel, I love bearing my testimony. This is a good moment. Why should I regret one thing that's happened in my life, because it's brought me here? And you can't look back and say, yeah, but if I want to be here, but I wanted to win the lottery 20 years ago, or last, and you can't have it both ways. Our lives, we believe, are choreographed by angels. Maybe they are, maybe they're not. But I'm glad you asked me about that. That was a profound turning point in my life, because I let go some very cankerous cancers of my soul on that day, and learned an incredibly valuable lesson.
Well, that's a great story. I know that many people have been touched by this film as well, and maybe they've had the same experience. I hope so. That's a great story to hear from you. Keith Merrill, thank you so much. Thank you for sharing your testimony and the stories of your life, and of all of your experiences as a storyteller, filmmaker, author, writer. It's been great to have you on Why I Believe.
Al, I've loved it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. For more information on Why I Believe, please go to mormonchannel.org, where you can download and listen to this and other programs from the Mormon Channel. Thanks for listening, and have a great day.